I hope you enjoyed the dinner and the awards and, of course, the quiz last night. I would like to give a special thank you to David and all the award judges for what they do, and, of course, to Richard for organising such a wonderful quiz. If you've not, just here's some housekeeping notes. If you've not already checked out, please remember to do so during the first coffee break and before 11 o'clock, and luggage can be left safely on the ground floor in the Portland suite. I'd now like to hand over to Sarah Greaves, Chair of Session 10, What Does the Future Hold?
Right, good morning. Well done, everyone, for making it. Congratulations. I'm going to lower the mic so you can see me without breaking them. There we go. How's that? Right, so we're going to try and make this somehow a bit full of energy and a bit fast-paced and a bit provocative to wake everybody up, because we realise that you might all be a little bit tired and in need of the coffee break, but instead you're here. We've got 1 hour, we've got 5 presenters. They're each going to get 5 minutes to tell you what they think is going to be the biggest change in publishing in 50 years' time. No pressure. Then we're going to have a Q&A around the room. We've got Dan at the back, who's going to be roving around with a mic to get questions and thoughts and opinions on what these guys are saying. Then they're going to get 1 minute to wrap up, to give you their big idea. Whether they've changed it or not from when they presented, who knows, based on your feedback. And then you all get to vote on which one you think is going to be the big change in publishing over the next 50 years. We were going to use the app, but that's a bit too technically challenging for this morning, so it's going to be back to the old-fashioned raise of hands, and we'll try and make it as democratic as possible and try and count in a way that means we do know who the winner is. Right, I'm going to be ruthless with my timer for their 5 minutes, but, you know, if people run over, that's okay. And we've got people representing the entire industry, we hope, from digital tools and services through to publishing, through to those who work more closely with funders. So we hope this drives a lot of debate and discussion, that it chucks up some interesting, thought-provoking questions, and I guess if some of us are here in 50 years' time, we'll see if any of us are right. I don't know who that will be. Right, no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jennifer Schivas, who's the MD of 67 Bricks, who's going to kick us off. Thank you very much.
Morning, everyone. Hello. High energy. Great. What's my slides looking? So my name is Jennifer Schivas. I'm the Managing Director of 67 Bricks. And we have been asked today to think about the future, and I've already been a renegade and gone off script slightly, because I'm going to talk a bit more broadly about some of the themes that I think will influence our one thing. And the reality is we've had a turbulent few years. I think everyone would agree with that, and we're looking out at a period of kind of further uncertainty. We've got climate change, we've got potentially recession on the horizon, geopolitical challenges, and just the ever-ending march of technology. So this is my image of you publishers at the moment. You're in your rowing boats that have served you very well, I think, for the last 50 years, but stormy seas, and many people attempting to kind of point and row towards a horizon that they just can't make out. So I'm going to attempt to do a bit of looking out and let you know what I think I can see in the future. And so the first thing that I really want to talk about is that as an industry, publishing has not imposed itself. We've not imposed publishing on the future. The future has come, and we have had to adapt if we are to survive. And that feels a little bit different to maybe the 1990s, when we were able to take our kind of print-shaped outputs and put them more or less faithfully online. We were pioneers, really. But we're now in a world where user expectations around the consumption of information and content, and we are in the business of creating information, those expectations are evolving daily, and they're being driven by giants like Google and TikTok. They're not being driven by us. People in other aspects of their lives do not expect to type in keywords and troll through long-form content to find what they're looking for. They just want answers, they just want insights, they want personalization, they want it instantly. And in a wider information environment like that, we are no longer the pioneers. In fact, even now, we have quite a lot of catching up to do, potentially. And so the second thing I want to talk about is in the future, machines, machine intelligence will consume and create and utilize a lot more content and data than we as humans would do. My prediction anyway. At conferences like this, and I've done it myself before, people stand up and they say, oh, AI is the future, AI is the future. I don't want to be the AI as the future woman today. I think AI is already here. It's baked into search, it's baked into personalization, it's baked into content recommendation. All your suppliers are using AI. As humans, as individuals, we're consuming AI-written content if we're on social media. I'd love to hear about Springer Nature's AI-written textbook. I think that's a really interesting experiment. So AI is here, but in the context of the future, what we need to know is it's now moving much faster. It's moving really fast. And so, yeah, in the future, I see machines as doing most of the kind of initial analyzing and understanding of the bulk of research, and that's reading, for want of a better word. And if we can start as an industry to see the huge exponential amount of content that we've created over the years and we're continuing to create as a data set, then researchers will very rightly, I think, expect to be able to ask questions of that data set, to perhaps get hypotheses suggested to them, insights delivered. And you know, machine intelligence has the potential to make connections across publishers, across disciplines, across the world, that nobody, even the smartest person in this room, we don't have the time, we don't have the mental processing power to be able to make those connections. So my final thought is about the erosion of the article as the default research output. We already have code, video, audio, 3D models. We already produce these things, and we consider ourselves really smart and shiny when we do, right? But for anyone who's born in 2022, who will be at the helm in 50 years, those things are entirely traditional. They're going to be legacy formats. They're, you know, not impressive. I do believe, and I know this is controversial already, we've talked about this, that researchers will want to abandon long-form article writing as we know it if they can. I think humans do have a storytelling need, but we could fulfill that by commentary directly on research objects, and our peers could then discuss and annotate and comment back. My bet is going on the research outputs of the future being super granular, living, evolving things. To be useful to machines, they're going to have to be interoperable, open data assets, for want of a better word. And I think that's something we're already seeing our kind of traditional ways of being, journal platforms, publishing business models, etc., and even scholarly recognition systems like the REF, etc., being challenged by. So yeah, I think if we look back in 50 years' time, we will have lost things that we love, that we're fond of now, including, I think, many of the companies in this room. I don't think we're all going to make it the next 50 years. It would be really interesting, if not too controversial, to talk about, will ALPSP make it? Can they help us to survive? Can we help them to survive? But yeah, I think things we will lose things. But, it's not all doom and gloom. I think for, our positions as part of the research community at the forefront of knowledge and discovery, that puts us in a position to be part of something much bigger and much more important than the business of publishing. It's data and technology combined with the human, combined with human creativity, human collaboration. It's that combination that's going to help us make the big strides to solve things like climate change in the future. And I think sheer urgency is going to drive a lot of that change in the next 50 years, if we are to end on a positive slide, which I'd like to. And so to sort of achieve that change, then it's access to research in machine and human readable formats, across publisher silos across the world. That's the thing that I think will be demanded of us. So those are my thoughts. I've kept them very high level because I think people are going to go into the detail of what that might look like or completely disagree with me. So yeah, looking forward to hearing from the rest of the panel. Ooh.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jennifer. So There we have viewpoint number one. We're basically none of us, all the companies we work for might exist and ALPS might not be here, so the quiz would be over, people. Keep that in mind. But let's see if anyone's going to challenge that. What's Daniel going to bring up next? So next speaker is Daniel Hook, who is the CEO of Digital Science.
Thank you, Sarah. Hopefully this is, I think this is the right level. Okay, so this is thinking from a few years ago. I've chosen 4 slides out of about a 90-slide deck, so I'm going to speak relatively quickly. Hopefully this will make sense together. But I've been thinking for a few years about what constitutes the kind of the atom of research and how we might conceive of the version of records changing in the future. Fundamentally, I think the version of record is something that we are tied to for a number of different reasons. So to start off with, I think we're anchored to the version of record for reasons of dates, for a start. There's something extremely powerful, disproportionately powerful about dates, because we need to know the priority of research, we need to know the order in which it's done. We want to know when something came before something else. And the date forces us into a specific conceptualization of a version of a paper. There are all sorts of norms built into the paper, into the book, the monograph that we all know. If I show you a picture of a paper and I black out the title and the abstract and the authors and the text and where the DOI is and where the title of the journal is, I black all that out on the paper, I bet you can tell me with about 95% accuracy where all those things are. And that's all built into our subconscious as we learn to be researchers. I think there's also a massive psychological element. We all like leafing through things. In theoretical physics talk, which is where I'm from, this is what's called a compact-oriented manifold. It's something you can hold in your hand. So we like things we can hold in our hands. We can hold a paper in our hand. And I think there's an anchoring to that with how papers have been digitized and put online. They still feel like things that are linear, that we can go through and that we can understand. Why not have a paper that's a website where you can link between different ideas? Because you're not sure if you've consumed it all. You don't know if you've seen every aspect of it. So there are anchoring factors that keep us in a certain world. There are also confounding factors that keep us layered into this paper-based world. The scientific method, we have to be able to build on the shoulders of giants. We have to know we can trust things. Without trust, we don't move on. And because we trust papers and we trust monographs, we're anchored to them. Data is starting to break the containers that we're all used to. Technology is starting to break those containers. We talked a little bit about different formats and videos and things like this, TikToks. All of those things are putting pressure on the system. The volume of data simply doesn't fit in a paper-based container. And if you want to have meaningful peer review, and you actually want to be able to check that something is reproducible, we do not provide that currently in a format that works. How quickly we want to move on, how quickly these things can fit together, how we can actually piece together the lifetime of a piece of research, all very challenging. And research is becoming more iterative. We look at a piece of data, we do an analysis, we go back, we put more data in, we look at a further analysis, and none of that's being shared, all of it's hidden. So these are some of the challenges that I think we face with the current paper-based format. So this is a kind of a thought experiment. How do you decompose a paper into the relevant bits? Well, the way I've conceptualized it here is that there's a narrative element. There are versions of things, data objects that exist in the paper. And at some fundamental level, a paper this is highly reductionist and only really works in science. But let's think of a paper as a narrative that describes data objects. So we have data objects and we have a realization of the data object as a graphic or as a video. And we have the narrative. And we can decompose that narrative itself to become a data object by doing analysis of it. and we can actually reduce that into something that looks a bit more like this. So effectively, a paper is a collection of assertions about things that we know about. And so this, for example, is an example of what an assertion might look like. There's a certain date timestamp on it, and you can see that I did this talk originally in 2017. There might be a DOI associated with it if it's publicly available. There might be a set of permissions around it to see who can interact with it, whether you're collaborating on it just on your own or whether you have colleagues who are collaborating on it. So there's a set of things around how open this piece of data is, how shared it is, how public it is, and whether you consider it to be published. So in my view, what we're going to is a world, and this is just again an example, where you would have papers where different assertions are publicly published, where because you have an intelligent environment, if you will, a research publishing IDE, like a software IDE, where you have continuous publication going on, where people are sharing assertions, and where as you're writing, your environment is smart, picking up on other assertions and bringing them to you and saying, did you know that researcher X seems not to agree with you on this point, and their evidence for it is, etc., etc. So I see a global fabric on which we publish assertions as being a key part of our future. And I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Daniel. There you can see the future of the paper is going to be lots of data assertions, so get used to writing things in code, people. Right, next up is Ritu Dhand, who is the Chief Scientific Officer at Springer Nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to talk about peer review. We've heard how the article should evolve. This is how I think peer review needs to evolve. Science used to be a lot more collaborative. Should be on the next slide. You went to meetings, researchers went to meetings, they presented results. There was discussion, there was input into research projects as they developed. Physicists used to deposit drafts of papers in archive to allow commenting and support. And over the years, this has eroded away. Science has become very competitive, has become very secretive. Research develops behind closed doors. There may be close collaborators, but you don't get that wider input by the community anymore until the paper literally comes out. Before, when researchers were discussing their research at earlier stages, peer review's job was to have that final check. There'd been a lot of discussion, and this was the final sign-off. And peer review's job remains to be that final sign-off, but because there's so little community discussion as that research evolves, it's not working in the way that it used to. And I do feel that it's taking place too late in the cycle to actually be supportive and be effective. And researchers actually need more of that peer support much earlier in their life cycles. And because of the way that research is done, it's not linear. There are many different directions that a research concept can take. And people try and sort of second guess what a reviewer on a paper may want. And early career researchers in particular struggle with what robust looks like. It does take experience, it takes time. And because research is so slow, it's a long, drawn-out process. And as science becomes more multidisciplinary, and everyone's trying to get onto the latest technique, and you can now because there are kits available, you don't always know the nuances of what can't be done or how it can't be applied. And these are the bigger problems that are leading to what we see happening now. So on the left-hand side, you can see that the peer review cycle, as it stands, the research cycle, a researcher cobbles together a few experiments, writes a grant, they get some input at that point, but not a lot. They go away, they try and do the research, second-guessing what reviewers may want. They've now got an idea of which journal they think they're going to submit to. They finally finish. It takes 2 years, 3 years more. They put in their paper, and 3 reviewers review it and say, no, don't agree. Please do 6 months more of experiments. We don't like the way that you've done this. We don't like the direction of research. We don't think you've gone far enough in verifying the research. So back to the bench, 2 to 6 more months of more research, wasting funders' money, wasting researchers' time, further delaying the communication of this research. And the other part of this closed system is that whole process when they're doing the research, developing the data, developing their protocols. That is actually when people like publishers or other independents could support them with data curation, with sort of highlighting which protocols should be written up in full. And that is all lost. By the time the paper is submitted, everything is in a final format. The data is in a final format. And it's too much work to repeat all of that from a researcher angle. But what if research could actually be offered at any point in the research cycle, whenever the researcher needs it most? It could be they've done a large screen and they want to now see what direction of research it should take. It could be they've got a new molecule and they want to know how exactly best to verify its function. And if they were allowed to submit for peer review when they need it most, the job of the reviewers would be to advise on the direction that research should take and what experiments may be required to verify that concern. And then when they submit, the researcher submits the final paper, we would use the same reviewers as we used earlier. And hopefully there'll be less moving of goalposts and fewer revisions would be needed. And what we've also done now is we've opened up a window in the research cycle when the data is actually being created, when advice on curation might actually be taken up. And you can also advise on whether a journal is interested. So you would get rid of that reject, submit cycle. And you could also deposit this paper into a preprint server if the author wanted to, allowing science to be communicated much faster. We would better support our researchers, we would save them time, we would save funders money, and it would be a much more supportive ecosystem. And if we look at what happened in COVID, that is what happened. Researchers were communicating results, not final papers. They were supporting each other, and we all saw bench to research in under 18 months. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Ritu. There you see we've gone from what could happen to the industry overall to the journal to part of the process in peer review. Now we're going to hear from Ian Caswell, who's head of journals at UCL Press, to tell us what he thinks is going to be the biggest change in 50 years.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the invitation to come and speak. Got a bit of a croaky voice from speaking too much yesterday at the conference. It's the first time I've been around people, I think, for a very long time, so bear with me. So I'm going to be speaking from behalf of what is a university press out of the university. So UCL Press is part of the library. We're funded by the university, and we publish monographs, textbooks, journals, all open access. And our journals are Diamond Open Access as well. So very shortly, very briefly, I've whittled this down into potentially 4 points. I've got a brief statement. So as part of the university press at UCL, we believe that rarely can the most interesting questions or the most significant societal challenges be adequately addressed by one discipline, one university, or one sector alone. Disciplinary excellence is at the heart of how knowledge develops, but to amplify and inform research, we need to cross what might be seen as conventional boundaries between disciplines and many different kinds of communities in the academic, business, and social spheres. This should increase mutual knowledge and engagement and develop co-design and co-production approaches to research and ways of finding innovative solutions to complex societal problems. But crossing these boundaries has proven very challenging in current communication models, especially within closed systems. We therefore need to overcome the barriers between the research endeavour and the societal needs that can inform it, and between the mechanisms through which research can engage with, for example, policymakers, businesses, community stakeholders, practitioners, and the public. By bringing academic communication back into the academy, can it seek to have more control over how it creates impact through new and existing open publishing models? And it is our hope that more universities throughout the world will take on or become direct controllers of scholarly communication by publishing its research in open, transparent, accountable, and equitable models through the establishment of its own university press or as part of its own research cycle and research agenda. So I'll leave it at that. It's very brief, very quick. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thanks Ian. There we can hear the view of a university press driving the ownership of all these journals that many of us currently publish back into the hands of the community. So that's a big one we'll drive some debate on very shortly. And last but not least, Stephen Pinfield from Rory, who is our only double speaker here at the conference this year, so I think he deserves a certificate for that. Over to Stephen.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know quite how that happened. I think what I'm going to say is largely complementary with what the previous speakers have said, rather than competitive, which might undermine Sarah's job. But I hope maybe I bring a slightly different perspective to this. I'd like to argue these points. First of all, that if scholarly publishing exists to support research and researchers, which it does, then the way scholarly publishing develops needs to reflect the way research develops. In other words, it's essential to take a research-centric, a science-centric view of futures rather than a publishing-centric one. And one way in which I want to suggest we can be helped to do that is to think about publishing as a set of functions which can be combined and recombined in different ways, but also to recognize, and I think this is implicit in what's been said already, to recognize that it's unlikely to be combined as it currently is for the long-term future. So if we're looking at the future of research, what is that likely to look like? Well, I'm using a label of datafied scholarship here. We hear about datafication of society, of the economy. I'm thinking about the equivalent of that within the scholarly environment. And that's a nexus of trends coming together, not a single trend, but a nexus of trends coming together, involving open access and open science, but also powered by artificial intelligence and text and data mining, machine learning, and underpinned by the interactivity and immediacy of social media and equivalents, and all supported by increasingly powerful computer power. Now, this is not technological determinism, because there's a whole bunch of social and economic trends that underpin this. I've mentioned a couple, like greater emphasis on sustainability and EDI and so on. And this is likely to lead to a kind of research which is highly collaborative, which is increasingly underpinned by large and complex data sets or digital artifacts, which is manifested in a variety of forms, which is open by default, not just for readers, but for machines as well, which means it can be automatically crawled and analyzed and surfaced in various different ways for different purposes, automatically through algorithmically driven systems. And that is likely to lead to the undermining of what we currently think of as the journal and also of the article. This will lead us, I believe, to genuine transformation. Up until now, I would suggest to you that much of what we've seen in the publishing world is not transformation, but automation. Taking the physical, analog artifacts and digitizing them. We still talk about manuscripts, preprints, papers, all of which have an analog equivalent and are mimicking the physical printed equivalents. And that's all very well, but what it means is that the automated system is still essentially text-based, fixed, and flat, even though it's digital. And we're starting to see more transformative elements coming in, which are making things more dynamic. But we're going to see this, I think, more and more in future, so that scholarly communication becomes more dynamic, more mixed media, more functional, more interactive, and therefore more inclusive. That transformation is something that I think we're beginning to see, but we will see more and more over the next few decades. But that does involve thinking about scholarly communication in this way, as a set of functions rather than as a fixed group of things, because these functions can be recombined in different ways. Now, Roosendahl and Gertz, in their original conceptualization of these different functions, mentioned registration, certification, dissemination, which they called awareness, and preservation, which they called archiving. To these, I've added a couple more of filtration and recognition and a reward, that is. And I've been trying to think, as we move towards a more transformative environment, whether these are these are continuities rather than they will change, and I think they probably are. Roosendahl and Gertz argue that they were continuities between the physical and the digital, and I think I'm now arguing that they are continuities between the automated and the transformed. So I'm arguing that a system most likely to succeed is one also that we need, is one that will be based on a research-centric view rather than a publishing-centric one, that will enable transformation rather than just automation of scholarly communication, still delivering the key functions of scholarly communication with which we're familiar, but doing so in new ways to support the academic community in its mission to push forward the boundaries of knowledge, which in the end benefits us all. Thanks very much.
Don't steal the clicker. Right, there we go. There was our last viewpoint on where we're going to be in 50 years. I'm going to get Dan to stand up and start roving around with the mic. So we've got about 15 minutes now for you to quiz the speakers or ask them questions or bring your own viewpoints onto the floor about what you think is going to be the future in 50 years. We've got one down here. Let's go. Come on, Dan.
Oh, Christ. Sorry.
That woke us all up. If you can just say who you are and where you're from, that would be brilliant.
I'm not sure I want to see who I am after that kind of introduction, to be honest. Yeah, the Messiah, yeah. Hi, I'm Emma from 607 Bricks. Great talks, really interesting points. I just wondered, a lot of it centres around transformation for STM spaces. Mm-hmm. How do you think your big thoughts will change the humanities? Will it, or will humanities get left behind in all of this?
Oh, great question. Yeah, we realised we were a bit STM heavy on the board this morning, so let's quiz them over their impacts of their views on HSS. Who wants to go first? If not, I'm going to pick someone. Daniel, go for it. You looked at me. I shouldn't have done that.
Now, I have actually thought about how what I've been thinking about works for certainly humanities, and obviously digital humanities is now an emergent field. So I think it works for some areas of humanities, but I think the critical difference is around whether or not you're asserting things in the way that you would be in science, or whether you're collecting counterpoints and counterviews, and whether you're trying to encapsulate some form of contrast or different concept. So I think the underlying structure is good, but how you actually create the application to capture the ideas needs to be quite different. So that, I think it can transfer, but I think it requires more thought.
So Daniel's saying his idea works everywhere. I'm going to now go to Ritu. Come on, Ritu. HSS, how does yours impact
Well, I
HSS?
would say that whole moving peer review forward has already happened in psychology. The whole registered report concept it was put in place for a different reason. It was to remove reviewer bias and to ensure that negative results were published, and that isn't exactly the reason why I'm suggesting that it's done for all the other sciences, but it's already there, and if I'm completely honest, I don't know how economists work, so I can't tell you whether or not it would be helpful, but I'm sure, you know, discussing a mathematical model and the way it could impact would be helpful to do that at a much earlier stage and get peer input.
Okay. Who's looking at me next? Who wants to go? Jennifer?
Oh no, I looked.
No. You're up next.
I think it's possible that we will see a widening of the gap between the sciences and humanities. I think in my sort of dream world, I agree with you, Daniel, but I think it's possible we will see a widening of the gap. And I think that's possibly because we're stuck on the traditional ways of doing scholarly, for want of a better word. I don't know if anyone was at SSP and saw the keynote by Dilla. Anyone at SSP? Yeah. So I don't know if you remember that keynote, but so he's a TikTok historian. And it would not be fair to not call him a historian. He is a historian, and it would not be fair to not say he has impact, because he's reaching millions of people who are, you know, responding and interacting with him. But he's outside of the norms that we have now. He's outside of the kind of scholarly recognition reward system. He's not associated with the university, but he's absolutely a historian reaching, you know, millions of young people through granular content. So yeah, I'm not sure where I'm landing with this argument, but I think, I think if we can kind of remove some of the shackles of the existing establishment, then yes, absolutely can and will apply to humanities.
Yeah, so we all need to go on TikTok, people. Right, Ian, what do you think? Transferable over to HSS?
So I think the difficulty with humanities and journals publishing specifically is the standardization of what journals publishing is, and how most of humanities work doesn't really conform or meet those standardizations. There's a lot of creativity and there's a lot of individuality, and it's not just about the written article as well. We're talking about more artistic natures of research and how that can impact and influence other areas. There's a lot of crossover between art, creating art, and images with science at the moment. And a lot of researchers are finding it extremely difficult to find a way of publishing whatever they want to publish. It's not an article anymore. So removing those standardizations might help humanities, but it might not help others. So I don't really know what the answer is to that, but I think it's, if the control is brought back into the people who are creating it, then they will find their perfect way of distributing what they want to do.
Great, thanks, Ian. Last but not least, Stephen.
I think it's quite interesting that yesterday on the session on books, it was pointed out that some advocates of open access in the humanities areas fear that the humanities may be left behind, particularly in relation to openness, and that will create a more elitist situation with the humanities where their work is not available more widely. So it's certainly something people are aware of. On the other hand, you know, there are high-level similarities. Humanities scholars, just like everybody else, draw on evidence to make inferences and to make an argument. And they do that probably in a more long-form way traditionally, and maybe that will continue. But there are commonalities in terms of the rigor they're applying and the different disciplinary norms that they're implementing that are agreed with their subject community. So on the other hand, I've tried to argue for something that I believe is inclusive, and I talked about digital artifacts as well as data, and I think it's important that we always do consider that breadth of manifestations of scholarship and the evidence that they're drawing on. But I think the principles should remain applicable across the different disciplines, but always the differences between disciplines should be taken into account in the precise implementations.
Great. Dan, where are you going next? Oh, you've already done it. Go for it.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Hello, I'm Charles Wilkinson from University of Michigan, and a little bit building on that, I mean, at our university, we see profound social change around, especially in the arriving students, with a strong values-based push to, push back against the culture of automation, speed, perfection, arriving at the answer very soon, to actually recognize sort of broader social change, the role of race, the role of gender, disability, thinking, so this underlying values social change that seems to be building and building, which is more about balance and having a life outside work. And so I was wondering if this is at actually odds with some of the automation and speed and computational power that you're seeing, and how that social change, which has elements of sort of almost like a Luddite aspect, a valuing of the long form, a valuing of the analog connected to it, and space. How does that fit with this evolving picture of technologically driven, computationally driven, fast activity that you're seeing? And might it derail the futures that you actually see, or cause them to be a bit different?
Great question. Oh, Stephen's looked at me first, so he's going first. Well volunteered, well done.
I need to perfect that kind of student looking down.
No one's going to look at me now.
Okay. Now, I mean, I think you draw attention to a really interesting tension and challenge here. To say that communication be more effective and more immediate doesn't mean that people haven't got to think about it before they communicate, but it often does mean that, doesn't it? Let's face it, it does. How often do we sit in conferences and when somebody's 2 minutes into their presentation, people are already judging what they're saying and they've got 20 minutes to go. So there's an important point here that we shouldn't, I think you're right, this is about us as a community or communities. We should recognize the value in thinking deeply, not just thinking at speed. But hopefully the infrastructures and the norms of communication will then, once we are ready to communicate, enable us to do that quickly, widely, and effectively. And I guess that's the balance I would like to strike. And we shouldn't undermine thinking deeply and collaborating, maybe in private before we go public, to hone those ideas. That's a really valuable thing. And the humanities have always done that. You know, they've always had the seminar, for example, 10 or 12 people getting together and discussing ideas that then contribute to the development of the chapter. And that's something we ought to think about, how we can improve and maybe do it in a digital form, but still do it. I think it's important.
Oh, a little round of applause there for Stephen. We're not voting yet, people. Right, who wants to respond to that next? Jennifer, yep.
Yeah, I don't know if it's an exact response to that, but I think it's interesting that you described it as going back. And I don't think what we will see is a going back. We've done R&D type work in the peer review space, and the training set is all the decisions that we've all made for the last 100 years, and there's bad stuff in there, you know, there's biases. The past is not a utopia, the past was not equitable or fair or anything like that. So I don't believe it will be a going back. Hopefully, in a nice utopian world, it will be a combination of that human creativity, the collaboration piece, just made a lot easier and actually freed up to be more creative, to be more collaborative, made easier by advances in technology. But I think for any kind of business owners or people like that, you know, if we're thinking about the publishers as companies, as commercial entities, what will be really interesting is that those people who are so driven by those things, those are the people who will be kind of taking our companies into the future. And it's probably a good thing when we look at the stormy seas that we're facing, because we're not going to be able to commit to the kind of double-digit growth that we've all kind of targeted, I think, for the past 50 years.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to chip it? Daniel? You gave me that look.
Yes.
Then it's Ritu, then it's Ian.
I guess I see that the tech stack that I imagine is highly iterative. So I think there'll be a tempo associated with the production of data or artifacts, or as others have mentioned, other types of objects, artistic objects, which will be codified and digitized, and I think there'll be a tempo to that. I think there'll be a second tempo associated with the making of assertions and the connection of those assertions to the objects in descriptions. And then I think there's a third tempo, which is around production of narrative and background. And I see no reason why the creation of narrative in itself shouldn't be highly iterative, because in a continuous publishing model, you have the ability for a narrative not to just be one person's view, but a melded view of an AI who's looked across a large field to produce a basis, a set of academics who've thought deeply about the analysis, another set of academics who think about it from a contextual perspective, and for that to be a co-authorship, and in fact a kind of constantly changing and evolving co-authorship. So I think technology can be an enabler of much more, of a much richer narrative in this context.
Thanks, Daniel. Another little clap there.
What he said.
Yeah. Oh, what he said. Brilliant. Well done, Ritu. Do you want to say anything else, or are we handing over to Ian?
I do, you know, technology will be supportive. You know, how does it mean that, you know, your end of a work-life balance? No, if you want to stop at 5, stop at 5, but you will have achieved a lot more in that space. It's a bit like what big data has done. It's given us more options, more ways to move forward in research. I don't think it is the culprit for the work-life balance that we have now. It's made the time that we do research easier, more productive. But the speed of science, I think that's something else that we need to look at. So that's what I would say.
Great, thanks, Ritu. Yeah, work-life balance, we all want to finish at 5, don't we? Ian, anything from you on that?
Only really to add that all of these tools are available, and more are becoming more available, and I think it's just the purpose of what you need to apply to it. And to some extent, I mean, I'm not a researcher, I don't really know precisely what researchers will think about using certain tools, but if they have the input to say, this is what this is for, and this is why I like working with this, or this is how exactly I want to work, then the model should reflect how they operate. Whereas at the moment I hear a lot of challenges about that, to say, this is how I want to operate, but yet I can't do that when I publish, or when I want to disseminate what I want to say. It's very, very difficult in some places, but for others it's really, really easy to do so, because it's mainly based around perhaps more of their practices. So again, it's this idea of a one-stop shop idea product, which is great on paper, but isn't necessarily executed with everybody involved in mind. That's all I would say.
It seems like everyone's coalescing around a similar view here. But next question, where's Dan going next? Over there, Katrina's next.
Katrina McCallum. So thanks very much for all your talks, and they were all incredibly complimentary. And I really liked the idea of this going not just to automation but transformation, and again from publisher-centric to researcher-centric. All of the things I think that the other panelists have talked about contribute to that in some ways. I want to be deliberately provocative.
Go for it, go on.
Because much of what we're talking about is enabling technology for discovery, for research, to do things as a tool. Yesterday at the conference, the final talk of the day was about text and data mining and the copyright exception in the UK, and how ALPS, representing publishers and individual publishers, are essentially trying to get the government to row back on a potential exception that would allow it for commercial research purposes and others. Now, this seems to me like the perfect tension between a publisher-centric view, and it's not a commercial view because there are not-for-profits who also want to use that text and data mining as a money stream over and above payment for the content, whether it's open access or subscription. How can the publishing industry move forward in the ways you are suggesting if they don't start to embrace the potential of that type of technology and use it for the benefit of research and researcher-centric views? I would like to hear from the panel about what you would advise ALPS to say to the UK government about that exception at the moment.
That is a very controversial question just before coffee. I think we will merge that in with what you've presented around copyright. How do you think copyright and the ownership of content is going to impact your views on the future for 50 years? And no one's looking at me now. So I'm going to pick Ritu because she sat deliberately back in her chair. No, Ritu's not going? Stephen, go on. Copyright, how's that going to impact what you're proposing?
Well, somebody lobbied hard 15 years ago for copyright exceptions with regard to data mining. I think you probably know what my answer will be on this. And in my presentation, I talked about open by default and not just for readership, but for reuse and analysis. And I think it is fundamental to the kind of infrastructure and sort of systemic underpinning that I'm talking about, and that I think we're all talking about, actually. Mm-hmm. So I would argue that we shouldn't row back on that. And in fact, if anything, we ought to extend it. I know it's easy for me to say, and people have got to think about sustainability and business models and so on, but I think that's the direction of travel, and we ought to embrace it rather than resist it.
Does anyone else want to chip in? Are we going to go with Stephen's very nice collective point?
I mean, I think I agree. Maybe I won't get invited back to ALPS, but I think that is what's going to be asked of us, and we will have to react. And I say us, I mean publishing. Yeah, I think that is absolutely the question, and that's the question that publishers should be asking themselves: is what is their role in an environment like that? Because yeah, open by default, I think will be required of us. What are we going to do?
Yeah, what are we going to do? Anyone else want to say anything? No, we've got 5 minutes left, and I'm going to get Dan to ask one last question. You've got the mic somewhere, haven't you, Dan? Yes, no? Yes. Has anyone got one last question before they wrap up and tell us their viewpoint, and we're going to vote who's going to win? Like the quiz all over again. Go for it.
Excuse me, yeah, I'm Kaveh from River Valley. I just want to say this was really inspiring, and really several speakers put their finger on it. I think the slide that Ritu showed, that really, that is what we should look at. That right now we're writing a paper, and again, I agree absolutely with Stephen, the clue's in the name, we call it a paper still, a preprint, etc. When I was talking about this before, I said that research is not paper-shaped. We still think of the primary sort of publication being a paper. And really, what you want is that as the researcher is doing something, immediately they can publish that. And it's reviewed in inverted commas in some way. I go back to when I was, like Daniel, I was a physicist. And when I wrote a paper, for example, I came across something. And the first thing, and I was a young lad, and I just wanted to tell everyone about it. I was so excited. They said, no, you can't tell anyone. You can get a paper out of this, which is still the case. You can get a paper out of this. So no one knew what I was doing. Science stopped, the communication stopped until I made a paper-shaped thing. I sent it, and a year later, people found out what I was doing. So really, what I call micro-publishing. The narrative is important. It has to come at the end. So the publisher has to publish that. But let science flow quickly. But just finally, it's important that each person who contributes is getting the right credit for what they're doing. That's the big stumbling block now. So that's so thank you, the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Kaveh. Anyone want to respond to that before I get you to give us your take home on what your big idea is for 50 years' time? Or you're all pondering? Okay, we're going to move straight to their take-homes, right? Are they going to stick with what they proposed in their slides, or are they not? They're going to give you their sort of one-liner about what they think is the big thing in 50 years, and then we're going to have a show of hands and somehow figure out maybe who won. Right, so Jennifer, what is are you sticking with what you originally said?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a cop-out because it's not one thing, but I think 50 years ago, we're talking about 50 years. So 50 years ago was 1972, right? We've predicted some things right, we've got some things completely wrong, where's the jetpacks? And the companies that have survived, they've evolved and adapted hugely. I think with the pace of change being faster now, and with the pace of change, particularly in technology, and as technology just becomes life, we keep talking about, what's technology going to be in 50 years' time? Technology is just going to become life. We're all going to be technology companies. We're not going to have technology companies. We're going to have companies. So I think the pace of change is going to have to be much faster, and the companies who do survive in this room will be the ones who have adapted the most. So not the ones necessarily with the most money now, the most content, the coolest brands. It will be the ones that are willing to adapt.
Brilliant. There we go. Keep that in mind. Right, Daniel?
So prediction is very difficult, especially if it's about the future, someone once said. And I think we find ourselves in that situation here. I think my reflection would be that infrastructure done well is usually invisible. The stuff I talked about regarding the paper and the things that we all have in our head about where the title is and where the co-authors are and things like this, that's inbuilt. None of us are aware of it. None of us see it. The successful technology in this space will be the one that you can't see.
Ooh, like that. Ritu, go for it.
I'm not predicting the future.
Is that your take-home? Is that it?
I will say that science has evolved. The infrastructure and the way that we communicate science hasn't kept up. And in the way that Daniel showed the future of the paper, it has to change. We're in a transitory period where we're holding on to print, mimicking print in a digital world. And that change, that making science easier to digest, and making it more modular so that you're bringing in all the different parts of it is a thing that has to happen, but I think it's a scary thing, and who will go first and who will actually take it up, but I do think it's a need now.
Great, thank you. Ian?
So, obviously stick with what I was saying, but as universities find more and more ways to measure and show their impact in what they're trying to achieve as a university, they will seek different solutions to do so. And if that isn't available in the traditional senses of what is currently there, then they will look in other places as well.
You warned everyone. Right, Stephen.
Are you still making this competition?
Yes.
Okay. I think what we're saying, actually, all of us, are pretty complementary. But what the emphasis I'm placing is I think we should base our view on a research-centric position rather than a publishing-centric one, to enable transformation rather than just automation, focused on the key functions of scholarly communication, but delivering them in new ways to support the academic community.
Thank you. And Stephen just stole my thunder, because I'm probably not going to get us to vote, because you know what? Everyone is coalescing around the same viewpoint and the same things that we're all facing as challenges within this industry going forward. How we adapt to the new generation of researchers coming through who are born in a digital age and expect faster, easier dissemination, whether that's talking to people on TikTok, through a Snapchat filter. Who knows what they're going to do and how they're going to want to consume content and distribute it. We're living in a world where Plan S, open science, open access is driving change, and we need to adopt different ways of reacting to that and provide the tools and services that academics need wherever they need them. And we should never forget that the researcher, the academic, is at the heart of this. Lots of us in this room were academics, and we've moved into this publishing industry because we still love the content that we produce and we disseminate. And we should never forget that they're at the core of what will happen in the next 50 years. And we need to be able to react and respond to what they want and how they want to share their content. So I'd really love to thank the panel. I think they've done a great job of keeping us awake and bringing energy and excitement to this morning. And all that's left for me to do before we clap and thank them is to say coffee is outside. You've got half an hour. There is one more session, so you don't get to go home just yet. And you're back in here at 11 o'clock. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the conference.